Hello, welcome back to Life on the Franch. Today we are doing something a little bit different. So I have gone down the rabbit hole that is BookTube. For those of you unfamiliar with what BookTube is a section of YouTube where people talk about and recommend books. And I find it to be incredibly soothing listening to people talk about their favorite books, what they recommend, even books they don't like. I also like watching people react to other people's tastes in books. So, for example, one of my favorite booktubers is Jack Edwards. And Jack Edwards does this series where he reads celebrity books, like books that celebrities have recommended, and then sees if they have good taste or not. But I thought it's only fair if someone judges Jack Edwards' taste in books. And I'm thinking, he's out there, he's judging other people's books. I want to judge people's books. I'll judge his books. Also, I'm not biased because I am not a booktuber. I have made, though, in full disclosure, book recommendations on my channel before, whether that's in nonfiction, in pieces I've done on free speech, or CRT bans or political legislation, or whether it's been LGBTQ plus fiction. And I do plan on making more book recommendations based on LGBTQ plus fiction coming up soon. So look forward to that. But first, I wanted to practice my book recommending skills by trying to emulate Jack Edwards, but maybe without all of the puns. I just don't know if I have all of the puns necessary to truly be Jack Edwards. But there are a couple of cues that I will be taking from his videos. The first is frequent camera position changes. I typically film videos from one spot, especially if I'm talking about a topic or reviewing something. And if I'm going to review books, it makes sense for me to do it in front of my largest bookshelf. Not this week, not this video. I will be sitting in random spots in my apartment, and hopefully it will inspire me to clean, but maybe it won't, and you will see the mess that I live in. So for this challenge that I've given myself, I have picked 4 books that Jack Edwards has recommended. So let me go through them now in no particular order. The first is Ariadne. Which is got a beautiful cover with gold foil leaves on it. It's very pretty. It's a very pretty book. And basically it's a retelling of a Greek myth, but from the perspective of Ariadne, so from the perspective of a female character. So I thought that would be really interesting. I haven't read a book like that before. I have not read really any Greek mythology, but he said you did not have to be knowledgeable about Greek myths to read this. And I mean, I've read a couple excerpts of the Iliad and stuff, but in high school, I don't remember it anymore. So here we are. Also, my sister is really into Greek mythology, so if I like it, I can recommend it to her. So that's why I picked this book. It wouldn't be my channel if I didn't pick a queer book, so I picked Notes of a Crocodile by Ki Menjin. I am so sorry for butchering that name. It's translated by Bonnie Huey. I'm so sorry. But it follows a group of queer teenagers in late 1980s Taipei. And and it's a revolutionary work. And I haven't read that many translated works, so I keep that in mind. I wanted to try it since Jack Edwards really recommends reading translated works, so I thought this is an opportunity to do that. So for my next book, I picked The House Guest, which is a short story collection, originally written in Spanish. The author is Mexican. It's by Amparo Dahlia. It's written in cursive, and I can't read cursive. And it is translated by Harris and Matthew Gleason. But it's supposed to be like Edgar Allan Poe, and I like Edgar Allan Poe, so I thought, give this a shot. And finally, I picked another translated work. I didn't mean to pick all translated works, but I guess like that was the video of his that stuck with me the most. So when I was ordering all of these online, I accidentally made a theme. But this book is The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Agawa, and it is translated from Japanese by Stephen Snyder. So that is my reading list for the next while. I will let you know what I think about these books. And we'll see if Jack Edwards can be trusted. Okay, so I'm about a third of the way through the first book, which is The Housekeeper and the Professor, and I'm enjoying it. It's weirdly light. It kind of reads like angel food cake. I know that's a weird comparison to make, but it's just very fluffy and sweet. And it doesn't mean it doesn't have any complexity or thought-provoking things, but it just feels like a summer breeze. And I don't know how to explain it more than that, but the other thing I wanted to say so far is a couple things. One, I am interested in the math that it's presenting. I'm underlining math terms like abundant number and deficient number and perfect number. I have no vested interest in mathematics, but I am reading it and interested in it, and I've even written here, fun fact. So I guess I'm planning on sharing this information with other people. So it is really interesting how it's made math something accessible and interesting. But what I am having trouble separating is, so I am working on my master's in education, and more so policy than anything else, but I'm interested in how best to teach different subjects, and the professor kind of acts as a teacher to root the child and the housekeeper, and so I find myself underlining things that I think he did well that would translate well to a classroom. And I feel like it's hard for me to separate this book from nonfiction pieces I've read that use examples of the classroom to illustrate points, because a lot of education research is qualitative, so they'll tell anecdotal stories and there'll be a message in the way that the lesson went. And it's really hard for me to see this as not an anecdotal story. So I'm hoping that will change as it goes on and we get to know the characters more, but that is something that I'm struggling with. I don't think people in general would struggle with that, but because of the books I normally read, I am struggling with it. I also have a quote I wanted to share from this book so far, that I really like. So, quote, "There was no shame in admitting you didn't have the answer. It was a necessary step toward the truth. It was as important to teach us about the unknown or the unknowable as it was to teach us what had already been safely proven." And I just think that's beautiful, and I wholeheartedly agree. Typically in some of Jack Edwards' videos, he films himself reading a little bit, like a little time lapse, but he always looks good doing it, and I read in my pajamas, so this is what I've got going on. I don't plan on getting dressed just to read this book. I'll get dressed when I do my final thoughts. So I have just finished The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Agawa, and I have some thoughts. So I maintain my position that reading this book is a little bit like sitting in the grass in the springtime as the breeze blows by. It's kind of got this elegance. It highlights the elegance in the world around you. It's kind of almost a love letter to math and numbers and the universe by extension, and the way that numbers are the thread or the lace that weave us together. There's this really beautiful quote. So, for example, quote, "In my imagination, I saw the creator of the universe sitting in some distant corner of the sky, weaving a pattern of delicate lace so fine that even the faintest light would shine through it. The lace stretches out infinitely in every direction, billowing gently in the cosmic breeze. You want desperately to touch it, hold it up to the light, rub it against your cheek. And all we ask is to be able to recreate the pattern, weave it again with numbers, somehow, in our own language, to make even the tiniest fragment of our own, to bring it back to earth." I've just never heard of numbers talked about so eloquently and with such love. And the way the book is written, you kind of think through the problems, and they show you the equations, and you're kind of forced to think about it with the characters, how you would solve it and how you would go about trying to solve these puzzles, these mathematical puzzles. And I think that's really cool. And I really enjoyed that about the book. I found it very accessible. As someone who, again, doesn't have an interest in math, I still found it interesting. And the language was very fluffy and beautiful and felt like cherry blossoms, which suits the cover of the book. One thing that was interesting is they don't name any of the characters. Also, in the back of this edition, there are like discussion questions, which I actually really liked. I didn't expect to like that. I was worried it would make it feel like I was reading it for school, but I found them really thought-provoking. So one of them, asked to ponder why the author chose not to have any names, and I thought that was really interesting. And I don't know if I have, an answer as to why the author doesn't provide any names, but I do think it's significant that the one character that has a nickname is the child. And throughout the book, children are emphasized to be the future and the most important person. And so I think it is telling that the most important person is the person with the nickname in the book. So I did think that was intentional. I also thought a theme of this book was about, found family and relationships, and what it means to care for someone unconditionally, and the empathy that goes with it. It was just very beautiful, the relationship that developed between the three main characters, and it took on like a very familial tone, and they filled the holes in each other's lives, and I really liked that. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed this book. I don't know who I would recommend it to. It's definitely not my favorite book. It's not my favorite, genre or anything. But I will say I'm glad I read it. And kudos, Jack Edwards. The first book of yours that you've recommended, I did enjoy. So on to the next. Okay, so The House Guest. Thoughts. Honestly, didn't enjoy it. Finished it, didn't enjoy it. I think I went in with pretty high expectations for this book because on the back it says it's like Kafka, Poe, Shirley Jackson. I didn't feel this was like Edgar Allan Poe quality. Like, I think if it had not made that claim, I would have been less upset about it. But like, one of these reviews says profoundly unsettling and capable of cutting you. And I didn't feel that, It says, follows her characters to limits of desire, paranoia, isolation, and fear. I definitely saw those themes in the book. But in terms of making nightmares come to life through everyday, loneliness, I didn't feel that way. But maybe that's just because I'm depressed. So to me, it wasn't that dark. Probably my favorite story was the first one, which is Moses and Gaspar. This story kind of follows the legacy of loss, what happens when you lose someone, and the pressure to live up to that legacy, sort of, and being driven to madness by your responsibilities. There were a lot of themes in this story that I felt applied to a lot of different things, and I thought that's what made that story my favorite. The House Guest basically read like a Criminal Minds episode. Boring. Fragment of a Diary, probably my second favorite. It's the third story. I don't want to give it away because it has a little bit of a twist, but it was significantly creepy, but I didn't like the presentation of self-harm in this story. It didn't match up with my own lived experience. I did think it was still a creepy story, but that's what I didn't like about this one. Cell literally didn't understand it to the point that I had to have Stan read it, and then he also didn't understand it, so I don't know what it's about. If you know what it's about, please tell me, but I feel like it's upsetting to read a book and not, a short story, and get nothing out of it. Concrete, I thought, had a lot of potential, was upset by the ending. So, in this story, the main character, you're not sure if she's delusional or not. At first, she's in despair because her husband is cheating on her with this woman. and you're like, oh my gosh, that's so upsetting, I'm so sorry. And it's written not from her perspective, but from her friend's perspective, which I actually really liked, because to me, as I'm reading the story, I'm relating to that friend and how helpless you would feel to like have your friend going through this. And then your friend, she's talking about how this like person is stalking her. So you're like, oh, like, what do I do? But then you're like, she starts talking about how the person that's stalking her is a frog, and the frog is gonna kill her. And like, your friend is like clearly like losing her mind. And like, I felt that was more creepy. Like, it should have ended like that, I felt. But instead, what ends up happening is that she's not crazy. The woman cheating on, that's the mistress of her husband, turns into a frog, and the friend stabs the frog. Like, when the villain dies at the end, it's not as scary as a villain who lives. Like, if this is supposed to be creepy, leave it creepy, and leave it kind of in reality a bit, where you have this, like, this delusional character and this friend that, like, doesn't know how to help. Or make the delusion real, but the friend doesn't believe them. You know, and have a tragic ending that way. It had potential, and then it just fell through. So that's the end of the spoilers for that book. And the last one I'm going to talk about, again, because I don't want to go through every single book. I did want to comment on this one called Oscar. So in this one, there's this, like, brother in the basement, and he's locked there, and it seems like he's maybe, like, nocturnal, but, like, he does a lot of, like, damage to things, and when things are out of order, he gets really upset, so the whole family has to center their lives around appeasing him. But it's not clear to me, like, he never, like, injures any of the family, it doesn't seem like, until, like, they go down and try to sedate him, and he doesn't, like, I'm just not sure what makes him the bad guy, aside from, like, these extreme emotions. And maybe I'm being, like, overly sensitive here. But it kind of felt like the Goonies, you know, like that brother sloth that they have, like, chained in the basement, you know, and he's, like, angry at his family because they don't treat him well. Like, that's kind of what I felt like was happening. So I had more empathy for the monster in the story than I did for the family, especially when, like, he does come up at night and, like, does nothing, and he, like, cares for his plants, you know. And then I was like, maybe it's, like, an undiagnosed mental health issue and his family's just not taking care of it. I don't know, but it was at this point in the book where I was like, this is a 1-star book for me. I finished it. I would not recommend it to anyone. That's why I'm giving so many spoilers, because, like, save yourself the time. Okay, so I'm through part 1 of this book, Ariadne. And I came in, Stan can attest, ranting about how much I effing hate men. That's how part 1 has left me feeling. I started the book, I, like, couldn't put it down, but, like, it's not, I knew it wasn't gonna be happy, because, like, they're not known for being happy books, Greek mythology, but I was not prepared to be as angry as I am right now. But I am enjoying it, and I'll give you more thoughts later. I don't want to spoil too much. I didn't know anything about Greek mythology going into this. I still don't. So to me, this is like a cliffhanger-y book. But obviously, if you know more, it won't be for you. But for me, I can't put it down. I'm really enjoying it, but I am also hating it at the same time. And I'm hating most of the people in this book. So that's my review so far. So I finally finished reading Ariadne, and I have to say, this book was a roller coaster. I think it's really well written. It's got a lot of F-men energy. Clearly it's a feminist retelling throughout the book, and it's really interesting to see all these people that I like, these like male names that I've heard like more so, and how like women were so integral to their stories and the abuses that women suffered underneath them. And I'll just say, like, but I will say the book made me feel angry. And when I, like, read for fun, I want to read books that, there can be, like, dark, tragic themes, but I want there to be, like, a light at the end of the tunnel, you know? Like, drag me through the trenches, but then, like, give me hope. That's what I read, like, for fun as a coping strategy for, you know, like, my mental illnesses. This book did not accomplish that, but it's not meant to. And what it sets out to do, which is to center the voices of women in history and well, myths, it does really well, and in a really, like, gripping way. You know, the only time I put it down was out of frustration. Otherwise, I couldn't put it down. So, yeah, I would recommend this book, but don't read it thinking you're going to come out of it, like, in a better place, you know. But I think, you know, it is definitely an enjoyable book, so I'll have to put this one in the win column for Jack Edwards. Alright, so it's time for the final book review of Jack Edwards' recommendations, and that is Notes of a Crocodile. So, Notes of a Crocodile follows these queer college students, and it talks a lot about gender and sexuality, and because of the time frame in which it's written, the main character, the narrator, is undergoing a lot of challenges trying to accept herself and her attraction to women. Even though it's like right in the front of the book, she admits that she has desires for women. The book is, like, the entire book is her trying to come to terms with that fact. But one of the things that I got most out of this book was the portrayal of, like, what self-hatred and self-doubt and a lack of self-worth does, and the negative coping strategies that it can lead to. So I saw a lot of myself in the main character, not because with my own bisexuality, this was something I particularly struggled with to accept about myself, but just other aspects of myself where this was a problem. And to me, it related more, like, the coping strategies and the self-talk really reminded me of my own, like, borderline personality disorder, and depression and anxiety. And there were a few quotes that I did want to share from this before I talk about if I would recommend it or not. So the first quote that I found really interesting was about, like, how much of something is your choice versus being forced to do something. And it's kind of talking about pressure, like familial pressure, societal pressure, and living up to other people's expectations. So it says, that isn't being forced to do something. It's your own choice not to make other people disappointed in you, I said. So you're saying that even though I don't really want to study this subject, it's still a choice based on my own free will, since my goal is to not disappoint anyone? Ziru's reply robbed me of any chance to explain further. And then later, the narrator replies, "Ever since I started to wise up, my family has been perpetually disappointed in me. Though it hurt them, I shattered their image of me little by little. If I didn't, I'd have to sacrifice myself in order to maintain a false ideal. I've been trying really hard to get over any resentment. It's caused them no small amount of pain," I answered honestly. And this is something I really related to, and I think a lot of people can relate to, whether they're LGBTQ plus or not. I think that parents have expectations of their children, and trying to live up to those standards can be very overwhelming, especially if you don't have a strong sense of self or a strong sense of self-worth, because you're getting your self-worth from others. So I thought that was a really interesting conversation that was had between the friends. And then again, like throughout the book, this theme of like separating yourself and isolating yourself and the ramifications of that comes up over and over and over again. So these are a couple quotes that kind of demonstrate that. What's worse, my attempts to avoid separation had only hastened it. It explained why I'd always been so quick to lash out at those I loved. My realization was akin to discovering the lost city of Atlantis. And then later, on the next page, I'd taken everyone I'd loved and killed them off in my heart, one by one. I'd long been tending their graves, secretly visiting and mourning during the day, going out and erecting a cross on starry nights, lying inside and awaiting my own death on starless nights. That was my Atlantis, the kingdom I'd built in the name of separation. And I relate to this so hard, especially like after leaving college. It's very easy to have like relationships sort of drift away, and like as people move, and it just like, it was very touching. And this whole book was I related really hard to the main character despite not liking the main character. And another interesting facet about this book is the crocodiles, the notes of a crocodile. So throughout, the crocodile is kind of used as a symbol for like the way that people look at and study the LGBTQ plus community, and the way that they're seen as kind of different and like fascinating, but also monsters, and like there's like, you know, this fear of being outed as a crocodile. And then they also have this like human mask, and that speaks a lot to like having to blend into society and having to stay in the closet. So I really do, I thought it was really interesting. I will say, for me, like the way that it's written is it's not my favorite book, but that doesn't mean I didn't get a lot out of the book. And it doesn't mean I won't be thinking about this book a lot going forward. So I am glad that I read it, but I think it's a book that you don't want to read all at once. I would recommend spreading it out more, and digesting it a little bit at a time. So for me, this was like a 3-star book, but that doesn't mean it's not worth reading. So overall, in terms of the recommendations from Jack Edwards, I feel like I'm glad I pushed my comfort zone. I think that's what I get the most out of BookTube, is like hearing about books I wouldn't normally pick up and experimenting. And when you're experimenting with books, you're not going to like everything. So I don't think this reflects poorly on Jack Edwards' taste. I think we just have different tastes in literature, and I think we have different reasons for why we read. And I think that is a whole conversation for another video. But if you enjoyed this video of the review of these 4 books, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more of our content, click subscribe, ding the bell button to know when we post. Most importantly, I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye!